I ain't gotta maintain my image in person, cause I am the same guy. I ain't walking in your shoes, but I do stand beside them. Another story on the news, talking about how another cop shot him. What's the world really?
$3,000 a week. So they had to pay well. And it wasn't just McDonald's, it was Shopko, and it was, all the other little stores around there. They had to pay a well-balanced pay just to get people to come in.
Check this out. I moved from California, which is, I think, bottom 3 or the worst economy in the United States. Like, it's either the worst or the bottom 3. It's New Jersey, New York, and maybe Massachusetts, and then California. Like, that's my understanding. But I know California is at the bottom. I moved to Utah, which is number 1. Number 1. They have it's called the Silicon Slopes, because they have like hills there and stuff. But it's their own Silicon Valley. I have some family that's involved in that, in some of that stuff and in that world. It's not my world, but I think it's cool. They have you can't find a job there that's paying less than $10, $50, $11 an hour. This was a few years ago, say 4 years ago when I lived there. You couldn't find a job for under $10.50 an hour, and the minimum wage was $8.25. But it was because they were hiring at McDonald's 16-year-olds that could barely legally work because that's all they could find. And those people would usually end up going to some other job in, a matter of 6 months. That's where you want the economy to be, where businesses have to stretch to the end of the labor market and pull that whole sucker tight.
But let me say this.
Yeah.
I am a proponent. I like the basic wage. I like what's it called?
Minimum wage.
The minimum wage. But it is supposed to be fluctuating with the cost of living. As the cost of living continues to go up, this number hasn't moved in 30 years, and there's a problem here. But I do like the minimum wage because you're not supposed to want to work at McDonald's for 40 years unless it's a life choice. But then that goes back to schools and education, and that's a whole nother ball field. But you're supposed to want to get better. As an ex-con, I settled into a life of thinking, well, I'm working at McDonald's for the rest of my life. And I worked hard. And next thing I know, I'm not. And I never worked fast food, don't get me wrong, but through hard work, I came up regardless. And now I'm 40 years old, and I would never accept a job back there because the skill set's better. Right? So my opportunities are more. No matter what happened in my past, my brain knows that I've moved past that level of minimum wage. I'm not too good for it. Don't get me wrong. But when it was set up, I think that was the whole concept. This is so you learn how to work, and then you get better, and then you move up, and then you move up. But people got trapped in this. And that's sad. That's why they don't have to compete, because they've got 20 million grown adults who already work here instead of the emerging 10 and 11 million every year that are supposed to be graduating and taking these jobs for a couple of years, to work through college or to work through their, beginnings of life. And they have a pot full of 50, 60, 80 million adults that are just happy flipping burgers. And I don't mean just burgers, you know what I'm saying? Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. And the whole debate around the concept of a living wage or a minimum wage or whatever it might be is totally useless if you don't also consider cost of living. Obviously, It's deeply related to cost of living. And what people don't understand, and this is on purpose because of in California, they don't let you build enough to keep up with demand. So there's more demand for housing here in California than there is housing. And
really?
So cost of housing here is through the roof. Now, people know that, but they don't understand why. And a certain amount of that is population, but a certain amount of that is overregulation and the government being so overly controlling and slow and efficient that you just can't keep up. And then that there's a consensus left and right here in California that's an issue, at least on some level, that needs to be addressed. There's question of how far you go with it, but it's a problem, obviously. But the common sense way of understanding this principle is like a block of wood doesn't become magically more expensive because it showed up in California. A house, and we can build up on top of that. So there's no actual 2D scarcity. We can build up. You can create larger apartment complexes, turn 4 blocks into 1 mega block. You can always and we're the richest country in the world. The capital's there, and our banking system is actually designed the way they print money. That's not actually actual like printed dollars or coin, is just digital money put into the banking system to be loaned out. That's where that money goes. So we literally have an endless oodles and oodles pool of that money to draw from for this kind of stuff, to create those housing things. It's just a matter of the cost of compliance with regulation, which is both time and money, which is creating that issue. But it can be fixed. It's just a matter of letting construction companies do what they like to do. You lived in West Texas, you said, for a little bit, so you know what the real estate prices are in Texas and how wonderfully cheap they are, because there's a great, relative to the population there's a great supply of housing, and they let them build. And so you can get a decent house in McGregor, Texas or whatever for, $100,000, $115,000, 3-bedroom, whatever. Like it's reasonable. Whereas in California, 3-bedroom houses, minimum $275,000, $280,000 minimum. In the little country towns where I grew up, which is the part of California people forget about in the Central Valley, that's actually is where Devin Nunes is from and is super conservative, and like that. I'm from that part of California, and it's expensive there to live compared to like Oklahoma. I have some family in Oklahoma. They have a 4-bedroom house that they rent for $750 a month. And it makes everyone in California, like, their jaw drop. They're like, what? Yeah. That sounds like an electric bill. That doesn't sound like a rent. That doesn't sound like rent. Man, crazy. Even me,
my house is on the market here now. And people from California message me all the time. They're like, is that really the price? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that would be 6 or 7 million here. And that just blows my mind away. I mean, honestly, I wish I could move my house to California to sell it for that price. But,
that's not how it works.
That's not. But that's true.
Unfortunate. Yeah. So what in your opinion are some of the main issues we're facing right now in America? We got plenty of them, I'm sure.
There are plenty of them, but I think a lot of them could be solved with term limits. Honestly, I think that the older generations that have been in there for 30, 40 years are so good at manufacturing problems that they just ice over each layer, layering it on top of the next, so they can be reelected to help solve the problem that was underneath the layer problem they just manufactured. So term limits, and I mean all 535, I don't care who your favorite is, they need to go. We need a clean house. And I think that would fix 70, 80% of the problems that are actually facing us today. And then the rest of it would be easy peasy. Because the common folk, we know there's a red and blue line, but we all live in the purple gray area. Yep. And those 535, they're going to go to lunch today at Shoney's, and then they're going to get in front of the bullpit and start cussing each other out like they're hateful enemies, when we know they're shaking hands and eating a porterhouse right now as we talk. So we've got to get that mentality out of there. And I know I'm supposed to say, oh, it's racism, or oh, it's the infrastructure. It's not. It's these people. It's these people with that mindset that I came into this as a $20,000 a year wage earner. Now I'm worth $350 million. And my 9-year-old granddaughter is mysteriously on the Forbes list of millionaires. So I'm a proponent of erasing 535 names from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I actually heard today also term limits for staff and working professionally in Washington, D.C. The people, the deep Congress was the term that they used for it, instead of deep state, the deep Congress, but instead of the State Department. But I'm totally in favor of, probably at 12 years in Congress, 2 terms as a senator, 6 as a House of Representatives, and total, like you can't just hop over to the other side and get another 12. Correct. But the issue is, I agree with that policy. I would advocate for that policy, but we need to choose that for ourselves as voters first before it would ever actually happen by Congress, because they're not going to do it, obviously. They want to milk that system till the cows come home. And so and that's where whether it's have you heard of ranked choice voting? Have you heard
Yes.
of that?
I
Yeah,
lived
I've
in
heard a
Maine
lot about
and
that.
activated there. Yes.
Yeah,
So
I've heard about that, and I think it's a great idea too. But that is another example of something that it's good, but it gets just next to the real issue, which is voters fighting, not being informed, and not holding our own side accountable, let alone the other side as well. Um, the way you challenge Nancy Pelosi isn't through running a Republican in California. The way you challenge Nancy Pelosi is through a primary in her own district, and it takes the people that are there to care enough to actually make it happen. And
yeah.
wherever you are in Arkansas, you're or Oklahoma or wherever, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, your local congressperson is supporting someone in the system. They've probably been there too long, and most of them are what I call a slot holder politician. I didn't even know until recently that they actually can have other people vote for them.
I've seen it. Yeah.
But even before that, I knew that there was what I call slot holder politicians, where they are just there, to do Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi's bidding, and they just say, "Tell me what to do, Nancy." Because if you're in a safe blue or red district, man, that's a cozy job. You have almost no chance of losing. The whole system's ready to show up and your whole local community is going to love you and respect you, and you get all the fluff with none of the job. Like, it's not a bad gig.
No,
it's not the way I would do it.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, the different perspective between someone who's truly like a blue collar worker, made their way in this life, versus someone who's born into money. If I showed up and I was getting 170 grand a year or 210 grand a year as a congressperson or a senator, like, dude, I'm putting my feet up, and like, I mean, obviously you got to work for the public, but financially, I mean, you're good. You're a few years away from a couple houses. And so these Congress people that have multiple houses, I don't really judge them. And if they have a few $1 million after decades like Bernie does, I'm like, okay, he saved something after 40 years, you'd hope. But $100 million and all this little stock trade, strategically timed stock trading and all that kind of stuff like that is obviously all dirty.
Because if I go to jail for it, why can't you go to jail for it?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And on that note, the stock buybacks, whenever a company buys back their own stock to inflate their own price, that's essentially corporate insider trading, because as the CEO or whoever's making, or the board of directors, whether you're going to have a good next quarter or a bad next quarter, or whether your last report was the sexiest or the least sexy of the reports that'll be coming up. And so if it's undervalued or overvalued based off of the inside knowledge you have. And so having the corporation buy its own stock when it wants to and manipulating that, it's not only corporate insider trading, but it's also a perversion of economics. Like it's basically economic masturbation. You're taking the actual profits of a business, and instead of investing it in a factory or concrete, true capital, you're just inflating your own stock price with your own profit. It's just going nowhere. It's just going into the dust of the ether,
And they call it a loophole, but all you're doing is you're hurting the economy in the long run.
Yeah.
Because that money could have built all that money could have rebuilt Detroit.
Yeah.
All that money could have brought in new water for Flint, Michigan. And instead we
need to have a collective butt kicking session for the local government in Flint, man. Like I keep like Obama got, and deservedly so, got crap when he went and did that speech and took the water and all that. That was a little disrespectful. But it's not the president's job to make sure the water infrastructure in middle of nowhere Illinois is taken care of. That's the local county and the local cities, literally, that they're in charge of the wastewater management systems and all that stuff. That's how it's handled. And I've never heard anyone be like, what about those folks? Where's the mayor at? Where's the city council? What the hell are they doing?
Where are they at?
They've been on vacation since the 1992 apparently. It's crazy.
It is crazy. But honestly, I think I think the government in itself is in my business way too much. You were there to defend my borders, and yet you don't care about the borders at all. You're more worried about how many more pennies are left out of my dollar for you to tax. And we got a problem with that. And the congressman, when was the last time a congressman knocked on your door and said, hey, I'm about to go to bill for that?
Feel like I've been in a new mind state lately, but still in the same route. Always looking for a move, let's get to the money, see what we can bang out.